Hello. Yesterday I talked a bit about I don't know how many days it's going to be since it went up, but I talked about the classical Sicilian, started talking about this early bishop d7 Sicilian, talking about kind of learning an opening and figuring it out, and trying to explain each step of the way to myself and understand it. And we looked at this bishop d7 move, though at the end I concluded I prefer knight c6 move orders followed by bishop d7. Now, I didn't get to this because I didn't think of it because I was thinking bishop d7 versus knight c6 at the end. But if we're going to play a knight c6 move order, it means our first three moves, aside c5 and cd4, are knight c6, d6, and knight f6, which means they can be played in multiple orders. If it's d6, knight f6, and bishop d7, there's really only one move order that makes sense, because I cannot play bishop d7 here. Knight f6 allows e5, and that's a whole different thing. So to get the line, this is the only move order that makes any sense to get here. But we can get to the classical Sicilian different move orders. Still don't want knight f6 first, but I could start with knight c6, and then here play knight f6, and reach the classical Sicilian through this move order. I probably don't want it with a d6 move order, because that allows the Maroczy bind, while by playing knight f6, I hit the e4 pawn, and thus c4 is not a move, and of course bishop d3 hangs a knight, so white's basically obligated to play knight c3, and we can get a classical Sicilian via this move order. And that means black has a choice. Black can approach this via d6 or via knight c6. And your choice should be, if you're playing this, should be entirely dependent on which anti-Sicilians you want to face. Because the open Sicilian is going to work the same way. But do you want to allow the Rossolimo? Or would you rather play a Moscow? Would you like to be committed to knight c6 or d6 against the c3 Sicilian? Or, I guess those are the main two from here, some kind of closed Sicilian with the knight committed to f3. You have two move orders, they're both reasonable ways to get to the classical Sicilian. So I thought I should address that, because I didn't think of it, because there aren't the two move orders to reach the bishop d7 line. But if we're playing knight c6 first, there are a bunch of ways to get to it, and we can choose how we want to approach it. Another thing I wanted to get to... So actually, I'd like to quickly first go over, I'm very scattered today, go over kind of the main lines that were worked at in the last video or looked at. I looked at bishop g5, I looked at bishop e2, I looked at bishop c4, and I looked at bishop e3, thinking these were the main moves. Against bishop e3, thought about knight g4, and perhaps prefer it via a bishop d7 move order without the knight on c6. But here I find bishop b5 annoying, so I instead thought go for a more traditional kind of, bishop e7, bishop e6, castles, rook c8, what's this called? It's one of those names starting with a B and ending with Eski. But I'm not coming up with it at the moment. There's a V somewhere in it. Boloveski is not right. Some name like that, I think these structures are named after, with the pawns on d6 and e5. And that would be my recommendation there, though I didn't go into any detail. Against bishop e2, there is also this e5 move, but we can play bishop d7 or g6. Via the bishop d7 move order, we were effectively playing bishop d7, then g6, but here we could actually just play g6 immediately and say white's in. Probably not the most threatening line against the dragon, though I do like bishop e3, queen d2, and castles queenside for white. That's a line I recommend to people. But we probably head for a dragon here, though we can again also play the e5 type move. Against bishop c4, we don't want to play e5 because our light squares are weak and the bishop plays on them. And in a bishop d7 move order, if we had a bishop d7 played instead of knight c6, then we were going with a sort of enter the dragon again line here, trying to avoid Yugoslavs. Now we don't have to. We could play bishop d7 then g6, but we can also just play e6, which is the main line in the classical, or we can play queen b6, saying your knight's a little awkward, and if it has to... What happened? If it has to... if it retreats somewhere like here or here, then the... Oops. Here or here, then the bishop can't come out because this pawn's weak, and so white usually plays knight b3, and that's a slightly awkward square for the knight, After bishop e3, black's queen will come back to c7, black will play e6, a6. You get a very normal Sicilian, but the knight seems a little misplaced on b3 with the bishop on c4, because that's normally where the bishop's going to go to. But most of the time was spent on bishop g5. And here, one thing when comparing the bishop d7 and knight c6 move orders is at first I got distracted looking at this line with e6, a6, and h6. And there were these tricks where against bishop h4 there was knight e4 hitting a queen on d2. And those tricks show up in the classical Sicilian anyway. We don't need to play bishop d7. It does nothing to help the knight e4 trick, at least not that I know of. And so I think if we wanted to play for that kind of line anyway, we still would start with a classical Sicilian, not with bishop d7, which is another thing I wanted to add. Our main line, however, was bishop g5, bishop d7. We were still playing bishop d7, but we were doing the knight c6 move order because we like it. I like it more against bishop e2, bishop c4, and bishop e3. Queen d2, rook c8, not developing our king side, very quickly activating on the queen side. Castle's queen side, knight d4, queen a5. We take on d4 before queen a5 to make sure there's no knight b3, and also so that queen a5 comes with tempo against this g5 bishop. White has three ways to deal with the pressure. There is bishop f6, and after gf6, black has two main ideas. One is trade queens, take back rook. We have kind of these extra central pawns. And we have two bishops, and so endgames should be pretty favorable. That's the kind of endgame I would really enjoy playing. Going to play e6, probably going to stick the king on e7 at some point. Bishop might come out this way, bishop might come here, and f5 is played. And speaking of f5 being played, the other main idea here is rook g8, followed by f5, because then bishop g7 comes with devastating tempo against the queen, and black is going to crash through on c3. So there's these two ways of playing this. One is a bit more active with rook g8, f5, and bishop g7. The rook also hits g2, but it's pretty clear the main point of rook g8 is to support f5 and bishop g7. And the other line is to play for this endgame. The computer was slightly preferring the queen c5 endgames, but both seem very feasible to me. And if you want activity and queens on, play rook g8. If you are happy to grind endgames, play queen c5. Bishop d2 keeps the bishop on, and this is interesting because queen c5 here, we don't have the rook g8 idea, so we look to play queen c5, but after queen takes, rook takes, bishop e3, they skewer our rook to a pawn and are going to pick up that pawn. Our rook on a5 would be very ugly and chaseable. For instance, b4 already looks like it's close to trapping it. If it tries to stay on the a file, I think it will be trapped. So instead, black plays a6, simply getting the pawn off this square, and we'll play queen c5 next turn. And knight d5 is not a threat. We can just take on a2 and threaten queen a1 mate. There's no discovery that does anything. Finally, there is f4 to defend the bishop, after which black has this fun exchange sacrifice, rook takes c3. Queen takes c3 is already a mistake. Not because of queen takes a2, when white can play queen c7 and our king has serious back rank problems, and we're lost. But instead because of queen c3, bc3, knight e4, when we already have a pawn for the exchange, we're probably going to pick up c3, because we're also threatening f2, which would grab an exchange, and then we would be just up a pawn with white's pawn structure shattered. White usually plays bishop h4 here, and then we can just grab on c3, that we can also build up first, because there's actually no rush. The best line for white is bc3, and this is the critical line that perhaps you could argue puts the opening in some doubt. Black must play e5 because white's threatening to crash through with e5. For instance, de5 takes, and now if the knight moves, there's mate on d7, queen takes d7. So black should stop that with e5. White should not take. If white does take, black's going to have bishop a3 and a big attack. White instead, before the bishop's opened up, should play queen b4, black has to take, and we get our pawn for the exchange, but white does not have the vulnerable pawn on c3. It has been improved to b4, so the knight's not hitting it. And against bishop h4, the main line continued g5 and bishop e7. And I think white is a bit better here. And this is probably the best white can do, though I still think it's a complicated game where black can play actively. Black's dream, if everything goes right, say white doesn't do much, is to play h6, take and start really pushing the pawns up the board. Actually, I mean, rook takes h2 is certainly better than f5, but I'm just showing the idea is to get these pawns rolling, and black can get a lot of activity even if they do not even up the material. So I think that was the kind of the opening as we looked at it. I then went and played a bunch of blitz games and then a lot of bullet, hoping to get some classical Sicilians. And I got one. And this is one of those things where you study a line and you're all excited to go play it, but what are the odds in any given game you're going to get the line? For instance, if we pop open the database, let's pop open the Lichess database. What rate are we going to get this? Well, e4 is played 67 million out of, let's say, 125 million. So a little over half the time. Let's just round down. We're going to do simple math. We're going to see e4 50% of the time. What percentage will we see knight f3? Well, this is played about 11 million times out of, let's say 16 million. It's a little more, but let's call that around 2/3. So 2/3 of the time we'll see knight f3, and half the time we'll see e4. So we're already down to 2/6 of the time, or a third. We play d6. We could also play knight c6. d4, it looks like, is played, let's just say 2 out of every 3 times. So we've got a third times 2/3. We have 2/9 now that we're going to see this. That we're going to see d4. We play cd4. Knight d4. Let's just call this 100% of the time. It isn't, but let's say it is. We play knight f6. Let's say knight c3 is played 100% of the time. So we're getting a classical Sicilian. 2/9 of our games is black. Black's half our games, so we're getting it 2/18 of the time, or about 1/9 of the time, will we actually get a classical Sicilian. Now, I played a lot more games than that, and I happen not to get it, but even if you are getting it 1/9 of the time, that's pretty rare. If we then only studied bishop g5, and I mostly only studied bishop g5, this is happening 75,000 times out of, 250,000, not including moves less likely than f3. That's another, less than a third of those. Are we getting this? And it was only a 1/9 or an 18, we're getting down to quite small numbers that we have any chance to practice the opening we looked at unless we play this very large number of games. So I played a bunch. I did play a pretty sufficiently large number of games, and I faced one, and they played bishop g5, and I played bishop d7, and they played f4, and I forgot what I was supposed to do. And I thought this was kind of funny, given that I had made my video and talked about what we want is not depth, we want breadth. We want to follow the Grishuk principle of make sure we've explored widely, because most games aren't actually going to get to that position 15 moves in. And here, I just automatically played rook c8. And rook c8 scores okay, but if we check the computer, the move's queen b6. And if we check the master's database, the move's queen b6. And I was playing bullet, and it's hard to think of stuff in bullet, and so you kind of play automatically. But it makes a lot of sense, because I was talking about kind of each turn we wanna hit X. We want to say show threat. What would black do with another turn? And just have a sense of what we do and our natural scheme of development. I know my natural scheme of development is rook c8, takes, and queen a5. That's what I'm aiming for. But there are reasons to avoid that. One is, did white make moves that, hinder our plan? Obviously, if white plays like an early knight b3, I'm not going queen a5, and I'm not playing knight d4 anymore, right? Did they do something to hinder our plan? The other question is, did they make a weakness? And when they play f4, it is a little weakening. The e4 pawn's a little looser. These squares are no longer defended on this diagonal, and b2 was, of course, weakened when they brought the bishop out. So queen b6 is a nice way to hit b2, hit d4, and when the knight retreats, I can use those weak squares, play queen e3, and these endgames are slightly better for white, but not much. I'm definitely a believer that black has pretty good chances in this kind of position. We'll play e6, we'll play rook c8, some order. Apparently e6 is a problem immediately. That's interesting to know, that knight b5 is actually quite annoying. So start with rook c8, then going to make moves, like show threat. We might play knight b4, hit c2, that's interesting. It also can sometimes threaten like rook takes c3, followed by knight a2 if their rook is moved. Why can't they castle queenside? It says knight b4, they shouldn't castle queenside. Interesting. So if white wastes a move, we play knight b4, they try to castle queenside. We have knight e4 because we crash through on c2 and pick up e2. So that's interesting to know. So knight b4 after rook c8 is a real possibility. What else was there in the show threat? We could play h6. Rook g8 also looks like a precursor to expecting them to take on f6, but I think any human would start with h6, which leads to a question. Why is the computer playing bishop f6 against it, not bishop h4? Let's find out. White wastes a move, black plays h6. Why not bishop h4? Rook g8 is useful anyway in preparation of g5, but also black could play g5 immediately. It's a very interesting pawn sacrifice. Just getting a lot of activity for it. But if we didn't want to go that, we could also play knight h7 or rook g8, oops, can't click, and prepare g5 anyway. Okay, so we have a few ideas here if we kind of get this endgame. We play quick rook c8, we have this knight b4 idea, which they can't castle queenside because of knight e4, and it's a little iffy for them. We can also play h6, and if they take, we're going to use the g file, and if they do not take, we can then try to build up g5, either as an immediate sacrifice or prepared with knight h7 or rook g8. So I have some ideas next time I get this position, and I also now should... I think when you see something once, it's really easy to not know what to do, but once you see it a second time, it starts to lock in. And I bet if I saw f4 now, I'd have a pretty good chance of being like, aha, these squares are weak, b2 is still weak, I have time for queen b6. If they had played queen d2 first, they help shore up, the dark squares. They're ready to castle queenside, so b2 is safer. Castling queenside will defend d4. By playing queen d2, they prepare a move like f4, but f4 isn't really prepared yet. And all these weaknesses that castling queenside will deal with after queen d2, white doesn't yet have that defense. So learn something. Now, the other thing I wanted to say was, it's going to be hard to get practice in this opening. If I want to play against bishop g5 specifically, it starts on move 6. Unless I have a friend I know plays the rouser, I'm just not going to be able to get in a lot of games in this opening. I could go play online and hope I find someone who plays it and hope they want to play me a lot and are happy to accept rematches, but odds are it's going to be hard to get practice in the opening. So what to do? I think one of the best things one can do to get practice in the opening is play a bunch of Guess the Move. So, if we go here, we have the top-rated games in the opening. We have a Karyakin-Morozovic game. We have a Dominguez-Howe game. We have a Grishuk-Dreyev game. I'm not going to look at the Dingliren-Zhangji game, because white won, and I would like happier results. Now, I'm also going to go a little further in the opening. After queen d2, rook c8, castles queenside, though f4 is also a move. Let's check what are the top 4 games here. Are they the same 4 games, or do we have any new ones? Well, maybe we want to check out Buldigin versus Dreyev. Looks like Dreyev might be a hero of ours as black in this line. Let's say castles queenside. Knight takes d4, queen takes d4, queen a5. This is our main tabia. Do we have any new games? Yes, we do. We have this game Jan Smits versus Vugar Gashimov. We have a Young Carlson game against Dreyev, and we have another game against Dreyev. We're seeing a lot of draws here. Now, what's the most commonly played move at the club level? Looks like it's bishop takes f6, followed by f4, followed by bishop d2. So let's start with bishop f6. Let's go to the Masters database. We finally have some wins. Dreyev beat a weaker GM, and Camille Milton beat someone. And let's look at bishop d2. We got some draws. I think we've already opened this Dreyev Dominguez game, so let's not look at it again. Or let's not open it again, but it looks like we already got the main ones in this. And finally, f4. There's a win against a 2600 and a win against Nicholas Sushambet, who tends to be a pretty good theoretician. So I've opened up this collection of games. I've right-clicked each game to open it in another tab. And I now have a lot of games I can play through, kind of guess the moving the games. So what I'm going to do, so that you can play along, is I'm going to change the window size. How do I do this? I knew at one point. Yes, alright. So now the moves are hidden for you. I will put the computer such that I cannot see the moves on the side of the screen. And I'm going to close this and just bring each game to the start and start guessing the moves. So c5, we're playing a Sicilian. It's good to start at the beginning. You don't have to. You could start at kind of a point of interest. But my whole point is I want to feel like I'm playing this. I want to think about each move. I'm going to guess each move. So d6 and knight c6 are both move orders. It doesn't really matter which one. I'll guess d6, but if it happens to be a knight c6 move order, I won't feel like I got something wrong, and it does. cd4, knight f6. We want to play knight f6 before d6 to avoid Maroczy binds with c4 by hitting the e4 pawn. Now d6, we're in a classical Sicilian, and now bishop d7 is our move. Rook c8. Okay, so we got this from a different move order. This is interesting, right? Because the move order we're used to is castles queenside, then knight takes d4, queen d4, queen a5. We're certainly taking gf6. ef6 leaves our pawns horrible. Knight f5. Okay, so we are getting to hear from a very different move order. But this is interesting to see, because, this could happen in our games. Queen a5 looks very logical. It hits the knight. It is, the place we wanted to put our queen. We obviously are not playing knight takes d4 anymore. So I think I want to continue with queen a5. e6 would allow them to just take on d6. So queen a5. Knight came back to e3. Now their knights are really on d5. So some moves that come to mind. e6 seems like it controls the light squares, d5 and f5. Bishop h6 pins the knight, and that seems a good diagonal for the bishop, especially because they're likely to castle queenside. It also stops them playing f4. I don't think knight e5 or something like that does much, because their knight on e3 covers c4 pretty well. And I don't think there's any pawn sacrifices with b5. So I think the two moves to really consider are e6 and bishop h6. Occasionally you'll get these weird queen maneuvers of like queen e5, and it's actually like a pretty stable square, or queen g5. But I don't think we're in any rush to do that. I guess f5 conceivably comes to mind, kind of setting up bishop g7. Rook g8 doesn't do as much. Their queen's not on d4, so it's not supporting bishop g7, and g2 is well defended. So I still think e6 and bishop h6 are the main moves, but there are a lot of ideas here. Actually, after e6, do they have knight b5? Because oftentimes if we play an early e6, knight b5. We can just take on d2 there, though, and they're not going to get pressure on d6. E6, knight c4, queen c7, knight b5. They win a pawn. Okay, so e6, we do have a problem on d6. Got to be careful about that. So I have eliminated e6. I think I'm spending too much time in this position, but I was probably going to say e6, and I think that's a bad move. So I will guess bishop h6. But I think I should also mention a6 is just useful. Like stopping knight b5s is useful. I bet it's going to be a6. But I said bishop h6. Yes! Okay. g3. This makes sense. They're going to play f4. They also blunt potential rook g8s and give their bishops new avenues into the game. We cannot play d6. I would love to play knight e5 and fork them on f3, but they will develop their bishop and then play f4, and I will feel very silly. Therefore, I would think a6 here. Okay, we are going for it. I assume they'll play bishop e2. And now, what was our knight doing? Are we playing b5? Because now we can play b5 without further prep. The one question is f4 annoying? But I think we play knight c4. So I think b5. Alright, we give up the bishop. I didn't consider this. I'm too attached to the bishops. We had a pin. We have the two bishops. But f4 is going to break that pin, and then our bishop will not have many squares, right? Our bishop's going to be very locked out of the game. We don't really have a pawn break against this f4 pawn. Our bishop, we're not really ready for f5 anymore. The queen's not supporting it. The bishop on f8 is purely defensive. So maybe it makes sense to trade it in this instant before it is blocked out of the game. And the knight on e3 is very good. These light squares are weak. We have trouble playing e6 because d6 is so loose. These good players are good. Who's playing this one? It's Karyakin versus someone. I don't want to peek over because I'll peek over and try not to see the moves. This is Karyakin Morozovic. Good player. Bishop e3, queen e3. I now would think knight c4, though maybe... No, I don't like bishop g4. I feel like bishop b5 check might be annoying. Or just f3, probably just f3. So I think knight c4. Nope, I'm getting all the moves wrong. But, this was an idea I had last turn and now kind of dismissed because I thought we'd got rid of a defender of c4. But the pawn's a good attacker, and now we threaten something like b4. Though their knight can come to d5 there, and I don't love that. So I still think knight c4, But we're probably intending to take back b-pawn now. No, Morozovic goes for it. h5. Okay, I mean, I like it, I just didn't consider it. I'm used to thinking of them as castling queenside, and actually b4 followed by rook c2 looks pretty good to me. But anyways, h5 looks reasonable. Now knight c4, can I get a move right? Or are we playing knight g4, and on bishop takes, taking back probably h? Now I like knight g4. Alright, I'm going to go knight g4. Nope, everything wrong. So I am getting some practice in the opening, but my practice is saying, you need more practice. Alright, two ways to take. If we take rook, we still threaten b4 and rook c2. If we take pawn, then I think queen b4 has a little more sting, but queen b4 is not that great. I want to take rook. Yes, alright, got one. Alright, they stopped b4, so that presumably was a real threat. Now, I kind of like pushing a5 and b4, have to get the queen out of the way first, so queen c7 makes a lot of sense, but then knight d5. So maybe just e6. e6, they're not currently on d6. Idea queen c7, which will help secure d6. My worry is if they can just blow open the game with e5 and our king's loose, but I think I have to say e6 here. If I'm really scared, I could play queen b6. We get the doubled b-pawns, but it's the part of the board where they have a 3v2. And the doubled b-pawns actually play pretty well against the 3. It's pretty hard for them to advance them without, they have to push the a or c pawn and then they trade something off. So I think queen b6 is the move if black's position is not quite as good as I want it to be. And e6 is the move otherwise. So I'm going to claim two moves here, like a cheater, and get both wrong. So that's important. All right, h4. Morozovic has higher hopes for this position than I do. I think we want to take on g3. I don't think that one, open up their king a little. Now, e6 does block in our bishop. Do we have a way to get our pieces over to that part of the board? Not really. We could always... I don't like b4. Alright, I'm back to e6 or queen b6. I don't think rook h3 does much. So I'm going to say e6. I have never yet been right. I just don't play dynamically enough. You know what I'm going to say? e6. Yeah, this makes sense. If ef5, then rook h1 is checkmate. So we start to have a bunch of pressure. Maybe that's why they had to play rook f2. Yeah, because I was thinking, this is kind of hard to meet because we have these 3 attackers on e4, and it's pretty annoying to defend, and we might threaten b4. Yeah. I think we have to take, and then... I think we just take on e4, fe4, because if knight e4, rook c2. Okay, this is probably a better way to do it. Because they could leave the f-pawn, but it's harder for them. Or if we take on e4 with the pawn, they could have left it there for a while. But if we take with the bishop, it forces the action a little more. Of course, our bishop cannot move because we'd hang mate on e7. But g4. b4 is kind of an interesting way to have our queen defend f5, at least temporarily. Probably just e6. Yeah. Bishop takes. Scary. We're up a pawn. I wonder what the eval is of rook c3. Like, is rook c3 a draw after, say, bc3, bishop c2, or queen c3, bishop c2? Or is white winning with the active rook? I don't know. Not that we should go for it anyway, but I'd be very tempted to play queen b6 here. I think the doubled pawns aren't so bad. I think they don't want to take b5 because we get c2 with check. We'll still be on c2 after, and if their queen moves away, our queen often can infiltrate on f2. So I'm going to say queen b6. Nice. I'm going to say king e7. Okay. Yeah, I guess the king is now within kind of one move's range of all our pawns rather than e7, which is much better for defending f7, but terrible for defending the queen side. Yeah, this is a much better move. A takes b6. How much longer is this game going to go? Quite a while. Well, I think we got sort of a basic Sicilian idea, so I'm going to stop here. We'll quickly play through the rest of the game, just because it might be informative. It's cute. And I guess this is just a drawn endgame, though black certainly is the one looking to press. Is it a drawn endgame? Nope. E takes f5's winning here. E takes f5's a win. So this is a draw, and they agreed to a draw here. Basically, white can barricade the dark squares. But e takes f5, king takes d5, f6 is the only win, apparently, according to the database. And the thing is, the king can't really approach without allowing this pawn to run. Huh. Weird. Morozovic didn't find it. Let's go back to the beginning. Quick look. We had this really strange knight f5 to e3 played by Karyakin. Bishop h6 I like. And I really like... I wonder what the computer says here. I know you can't see it, but I'm going to quickly pop open the computer. The computer says black is better with knight e5 or f5. But black just has an advantage here. Bishop h6 was correct. Knight e5, bishop e2, and now queen b6. Ooh, hitting b2 and e3, and we're going to take e3 and double their pawns. Yeah, black's just better there. Yep, black is just better. No, now it's changed. It thinks knight cd5 in response. Okay, yeah, that is a response that stops the doubling. So it comes to like bishop e3, which makes a lot of sense. Our bishop's going to get blocked out. I just didn't consider it. But this is something to note. Once white has played g3, if our bishop's here, we often just want to give it up. So b5 actually was worse than h5 immediately. And, okay. For a second, it said knight g4 was better. Now it's going back and forth. Seems like either knight g4 or knight c4 is good for black. So I don't feel as bad about not getting that one. Ooh. Black is winning here, apparently, with b4. b4. Because b2 is hard to play. And if knight d5, ba3, ba3, e6, knight f6, king e7, knight d7, and are we crashing through? We are. Rook c3. And if something like queen f2, then queen takes a3, and we're going to crash through. Really interesting. King g2, rook g8. Yeah. Huh. Fascinating attack. So black's actually just winning out of the opening. That's really interesting. All right. Let's turn off the computer, hide the moves, and move on to the next one. Well, because of the thing at the bottom, I'll be able to see when... it seems like white just had a huge advantage this game, right? Right? Yeah, so white's winning out of the opening. So let's get to where that happened and try to figure out why the wrong move was wrong for black. So bishop d7, f3. Okay, we're not familiar with this, but we'll start with rook c8. That seems plausible. Still probably looking to play knight d4 and queen a5. Yeah, so I think we'll take on d4. Queen a5, hit the bishop. So with our bishop on d7, we already have b5 supported, so we could play for a quick b5, b4. We can never take on c3, right, because we don't have knight e4 after f3 defends that, so we're going to have to find new ways to attack their position. So I think I would be deciding between b5, e6, and h6. I think with their pawn on f3, white is close to getting an English attack. So h6, bishop e3 seems like helping them get their bishop out of the way of their pawns. So I don't think I like h6. I like the idea of b5. I feel like using our, the fact that we have the bishop on d7 is nice. Alright, so I didn't like h6. I'm curious. I will check with the computer quickly what it says here. It likes e6, probably. Now it's going back and forth. It likes h6, it likes e6. It does not like b5. Why not? Because knight takes b5 just wins a pawn. Yep, fair enough, because my queen's hit. Yeah, okay, so my move was silly. And I wrongly eliminated h6. I do think it helps white scheme, but also it's not clear how black develops our king side, and h6 presumably helps do so. I would now play g6 or a6. I'm going to go with a6. Yeah, just control that b5 square. And now b5, g6, g5. I don't believe in rook c3. I'm going to say g6. No. Doesn't the bishop feel so misplaced on d7? Like it should be on e6? Who's playing this one? This one is Dominguez Wang Hao. Alright. Now I assume bishop e7. I always am tempted to play like knight h7 in advance, right? And try to play bishop g5 and trade the dark squared bishops. But it's tough with our pawn on a d6 because we can't really let the bishop move. And so like kind of maneuvers to blockade the dark squares and trade off their dominant central bishop don't really work here. So I think this is a tough position to play. I still... castling's scary. I don't know. I would consider castles. I'd consider bishop e6. I'd consider knight h7. I'd consider b5. I'll say bishop e6. I like giving our knight the d7 square. Nice! I got to move right. And it also gets better control over d5. But it does make me feel like our bishop on d7 was not an ideally placed piece. And that, you know, and maybe we need something better against f3. Maybe this is a pretty dangerous line. I don't see a way to stop their kingside expansion, so I would play knight d7 and start swinging to the kingside. He goes for it. Rook c3. Queen c3. Oh, but we get e2. So this is wrong. So what's right? Queen a2, I would guess? I'll check the computer. Not going to go further on this game. Queen a2 and black is fine. Or at least doing okay. A bit worse. King c1. And then either castles or d5 open up the game. Interesting. But I like castles and rook c8. Seems like there's some initiative here. If white tries to force queens off, then queen a3, ba3, d5, we hit a3, and we open up the game nicely for our minor pieces. Okay. I think that was an interesting one. Let's try Dominguez Dreyev. Dreyev seems to be the guy who knows what he's doing in this opening. So I should be mentioning each move here, but you know these are pretty straightforward. So bishop d7 is our move. Rook c8. Knight takes d4. Queen a5. So they played a quicker f4 and haven't castled queenside yet, and this means we haven't been able to stop them playing e5. Now it's always a little worrying when they if we play de5 and they have the d file open, because suddenly castle's queenside and they start threatening horrible, horrible things. So maybe just like knight g4. No, I don't know. Glad I don't have this position. Because I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it's like okay. Like, now you look at the computer. The computer likes white. By a lot. It wasn't that excited about white the move before, but it's very excited now. It thinks black should sack the exchange. Alright, I'm not really in guess the move mode because I've been doing moves, but it's hard to sack the exchange here when knight e4 doesn't even grab a pawn. So I don't really believe in that. Dreyev took, and now what? Does our knight go to g4? Because then we threaten e5 at least. Yeah, I'm going to say knight g4. Ah, the e-pawn's pinned to g5. That's worth knowing. Okay, e6, just very calm. And I assume castle queenside, we'd meet with just bishop c6. Yeah, I'm going to say bishop c6, just get out of the way of, like, danger. We still have the pawn pinned to the bishop. Yep, nice. Okay, I'm feeling better about this, but this clearly required kind of specific understanding of the position that I didn't yet have. But the queen on a5 does work. Ooh. It still looks scary. So, like, say queen a2, white would play knight c7 check, because rook c7, queen d8 mate, or king e7, queen d6 mate. So, gotta be careful. Probably just knight d5. c4, ooh. I think knight d5, though. I'm gonna say knight d5. Why did I think we couldn't take this? I didn't even consider taking it, but we have two attackers, and if bishop b5, we can play queen b5. They don't have mate, and the pawn's still pinned to g5, so they take the opportunity to take now. Now we cannot play bishop f1 due to queen d7. White threatens fg7. So I think we have to play gf6. Now after bishop f6, rook g8, they don't have queen d8 mate, but they have bishop b5 check, queen b5, queen d8, rook d8 mate. Ooh. No, I don't know how we're getting out of this. I do not know. What about bishop c6? We avoid bishop b5 checks later. We hit their bishop, so fg7 is met by queen g5 check, and then we can pick up g7 easily. I think bishop c6. Good, okay. Stays scary. I will say rook g8. Ooh, that makes more sense. Okay, yeah. Don't let them open the diagonal, now that we have a chance to stop it. Alright, I like that. Where to put our bishop now? Bishop c5? I'll say bishop c5. I'm too scared to take on g2. I am afraid of ghosts. Bishop b6, I think queen d6 might be annoying, but then we probably have queen c5, so I'm going to say bishop b6. Try to trade queens. Now queen c5. Huh. So just a repetition here. Kind of just interesting. Bishop b4 is cute. It threatens queen b3. I realize I've lost the whole guess the move vibe, but black is playing some really interesting attacking concepts here. Alright, so very complicated game for sure. And it's going to go on a long time. Yeah. Eventually, Grishuk and Dreyev draw this one. Grishuk very clearly played some pretty strong prep here. But black found their way out with some very precise moves I would not want to have to find over the board. Apparently this has been played a lot. This is like a pretty regular position. Interesting. Okay. These are scary games. These are telling me that against, 2700s that are booked up, this is pretty scary. So, okay. We're moving on to a Boligan game versus Dreyev, our hero. c5. Let's guess d6 move order. cd4. I do like inserting knight f6 early. I think it can throw some players off, because dc5, knight e4 is pretty much just equal immediately. So knight c3, cd4 just transposes to normal stuff, and I don't think white has any way to exploit this move order. So I think knight f6 is like a reasonable move order that not many people play. Yeah, and we get a normal one, knight c6, bishop d7, rook c8. Okay, so we can't take on d4 now, and we can't play queen a5, so this will be interesting and informative, because what to do when our scheme is explicitly stopped. Do we play a6, do we play e6, or do we play h6? I don't know. I'm curious to find out. I will guess... I think e6 before a6 is probably not great, because knight b5 is quite annoying. So I would guess a6 or h6. I will go with h6 and be wrong. I will go with now h6 and be wrong. You know, I had the right set of moves, just got the wrong one every time. Alright, white never really wants to play bishop f6, queen d6. First of all, black's going to get a pawn back at some point on the c file if they want to. But second of all, the two bishops are really good. Black doesn't have to. Castles. Ooh, interesting. Alright, so black in fact did not agree with my take, and did not think they could give up the pawn. This looks like a castle suicide variation. Yeah. Yeah. These positions are very complicated. Yeah, this is a kind of standard classical Sicilian type position. I'm just curious if there's any alternatives here. So the computer likes h6 here. Who said h6? I think I might have said h6. Bishop f6, gf6. Bishop d3 is apparently the main move, but let's say castle queenside. f5. Nice. Bishop g7 coming. Bishop takes f5. Yeah, I like this. Okay. So I would probably play that way if I got this position. On to the next one. And my point here is just like, it's not that we're specifically playing this opening, it's just kind of... I'm unlikely to get practice in the opening exactly, but by doing Guess the Move, I get to see a lot of positions that might emerge from it, and at least have thought a little about them. So if I get this over the board in a game, I'm not seeing these positions for the first time. It's not the first time I'm thinking about them. I might have studied the theory, but it's not the first time I'm on my own having to try to play a move. And I'm not always forcing myself to guess a move in each of these positions, but I'm giving myself kind of enough experience that I have, that I'll have hopefully thought about each position we see a little, thought about some candidate moves, and seen what a good player actually played. So bishop d7, rook c8, knight takes d4, queen a5, and here we were playing rook takes c3, because we can follow with taking on e4. Yep. bc3 is correct, we have covered this. And against bc3, we play e5 because white is threatening e5 immediately with devastating effect. Yep. Queen c4. Okay, so they were right not to take on e5. We've looked at queen b4 before, but I don't know if I've looked at queen c4. So one move that springs to mind is bishop e6, trying to win e2. a2. I do feel like I looked at this, though. Is there d5? d5, ed5, bishop a3 doesn't seem like enough. So on bishop e6, they have queen b5 check. That's the problem with that move. Can't take e4, obviously. I don't... Queen a3 check, does it do anything? Huh, I really don't know. This feels like such a normal position. I feel like I checked it yesterday. I knew queen b4 was the best move. But what to do against queen c4? If you look at the bottom, you'll see down here, after queen c4, it's just equal. Black is doing fine. Ooh, and I did see the next move, and it is d5. Cool, nice, okay. Yeah, when you see this kind of position, we're down in exchange, their king's open, we want to play actively, we want to get our bishop out. I just couldn't justify d5 because I thought bishop a3 check isn't that big a deal. But apparently it just works, which is great to know. d5, rook d5. So they just give the exchange. So on e takes d5... Alright, checking the computer. Bishop a3, king d2. If king b1... we have seen this before. Knight e4. Yeah. Because if they take... Suddenly queen b6 is mating, they can't block on b3, and if they don't take, we crash through on c3, and if rook d3, knight c5 cuts their queen off from the square it needs to stop this mate, and we're just winning. So they had to play rook d5. This is cool. I like this. Knight d5. We have gotten the exchange back. Queen c3, bishop a3, queen a3, queen d5. I think queen c3 makes sense. Yeah, I'm going to say queen c3. Was queen c3 bad? I think queen c3 is a little better for white after queen e5. And that queen d5 is a, I guess, better version. I would play bishop a3 check. Ooh, nice. Yeah, okay. The reason I didn't like queen d5 was because I didn't see how we could grab the f4 pawn. But if we can, this is better. Yeah, for sure. a6. Interesting that b6 is the choice. Again, b6 is clearly better. Bishop a3 check can also be inserted, but is then followed by b6. So a6 maybe has problems with c4, c5, c6. But especially that c4, c5 can give white a really good set of pawns. And b6, I wasn't thinking about white moving their doubled pawns, but actually those pawns can run real quick, and b6 plays against those pawns reaching good squares. So, okay, b6. Bishop d6. I would say king f7. I think you want to keep the king centralized. I could even see king d8, actually. But I would say king f7. Now we don't have to worry about the h-pawn, because a bishop can be trapped there if it comes there. So where does our rook kind of belong? I don't think we should take on a4. Rook a1, I think. Probably good. Bishop a4, rook a1, b5, c4. No, I don't like that. a6. I'm not sure. Bishop a4, rook a1, b5, c4, a6, cb5. If ab5, then c4 again. And if bishop b5, ab5, rook a7 check, their rook gets in. There's also just a bishop a4, rook a1, b5, bishop a7. And then we still have our bishop weirdly trapped on the side of the board, and we haven't even won a pawn. So I don't want to touch that. Instead, I probably rook e8 or rook c8. a5's a bit annoying, though. I don't know. I don't actually see where our rook gets active. So I'm going to say rook c8, thinking about bishop e5. Cool. I say bishop e5. I guess our pawn's actually like pretty decent. I was going to say yeah. Maybe h5, prepare g5. I want to start pushing on both sides. Just going with the a-pawn. I guess we have c5 under control. I'm still going to say h5. Alright, bishop d6. h5! No fear. Bishop h7, f5 still traps the bishop. Hard to go pick off because our king can't approach, but bishop c5. Rook a5. g4. I think we need to create a passer. Rook doesn't really matter, but actually say rook a4 check. I'm going to retreat, rook a8. No, make the passer. Okay. Yeah, because I didn't... I guess rook d4, hit the bishop and the pawn. I get behind the passer. Complicated. Let's just see what happens. Yes, successful liquidation occurs. Yeah, I agree to a draw. Okay, interesting one. Now, another thing I do is I opened up a lot of high-level games. And I think another interesting way to approach this, and actually I want to maybe switch to that, is, like, take this position, right? Queen a5, here was like our main position to start things with. If I go now to the Lichess database, pressing the wrong things, you can't see, but silly things were done. the Lichess database, and look at the highest rated games there, sometimes those games are going to be in some ways more informative because they'll show more serious mistakes. So I'm going to open 2 games by 2700s, and let's see what happens there. Okay. Bishop d2. So I think we don't want to play queen c5, because if queen takes and bishop e3, we want to play a6 so that the a-pawn doesn't hang. Alright, they already don't know our theory, and if I check the computer, this isn't so bad, but it's not my theory. So I'm going to close this one. Many such attempts to like study something and learn something like this don't work out great. Sometimes you just can't find the moves you want to practice against. Alright, against f4, we play rook c3. Nope. Alright, so the top games here, let's see if there's any rook c3 games. Here's a game between 2600s. Rook c3, bc3. That is correct. We now have to play e5. We've seen this. Nice. Ooh, they should not take. Now d e5 and bishop a3 is going to be very active. So I think bishop a3 check. Now they have to go to d2 because king b1, queen b6 is game over. Castles is complicated, right? Castles, bishop f6, gf6, queen d7, rook d8, we win. But bishop f6, gf6, if they don't grab on d7, have we just shattered our kingside position? Do we want something like knight g4? Do we want bishop c6? Do we want bishop g4? No, that allows queen b5. So we don't want like bishop e6 or bishop g4. We need our bishop on the diagonal that stops queen b5 happening. The question is knight g4 or something like bishop c6 or just castles? Haven't a clue. I kind of like knight g4. So something like... so they can't play king e2. They can play king e2. I was thinking we have bishop e5, but of course once they've played king e2, their c-pawn isn't pinned, and they can play c4. So... Alright. I say castles. I am incorrect. But... what happened? But this was a horrible blunder, and white is now winning. Castles was the correct move. Cool. And castles is equal, so castles should have been played. And then bishop f6, gf6. Now they can't take on d7. King e1 has been played the most. And bishop c6 or bishop e6. And it's complicated, but about equal. Interesting. So anyways, hopefully this counts as some practice in the opening. I've had to make decisions in it. I've seen moves. I've gotten many moves wrong. But I've gotten a sense, hopefully a bit more of kind of what the standard moves are. I think that d5 break was really key. Knowing that black can sack that d5 pawn after playing e5 is really useful to know. And I've seen more examples and I've done some more thinking. So I still haven't really gotten in any real practice games in the opening. But trying to play guess the move, not just watching other people play, but making sure I'm involved and thinking each turn and trying to make moves, is the closest I'm going to be able to come to getting experience playing the opening without actually having that experience. And so I think a good follow-up to the kind of last videos focus on, alright, let's figure out some theory, let's muddle our way through, clearly having no idea what we're doing, and trying to use as many analogies as we can to openings we know a little more about and thinking, what are the differences, how does this change it? And now, hopefully, getting a little experience, a little sense of how it works. And maybe someday I'll get it in some recorded games, maybe I won't. But if I do get it over the board or in a longer time control game, hopefully I have a better chance to figure out the, very clearly real complexities of the opening. Because this is very complicated stuff. A lot of these exchange sacks, a lot of just complicated Sicilian structures where there is activity and pawn pushes on both sides of the board. A lot of pawns stay on, a lot of pieces stay on. It's a complicated game. And if I go into it having studied some theory but without any other knowledge, I think my chances in a real game are pretty low. And I think by at least doing some exploration of this type, looking at the database, guessing as many moves as you can, trying to ask questions like, why not this? Why not that? Why was this move correct? That move looked correct, is going to hopefully give useful understandings you wouldn't get otherwise.